I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Holly Woodings. She was elected to the Boise City Council in November of 2017 and began her term in January 2018. Holly believes that Boise is a great place to raise a family, start or grow a business, and inspire the next generation of young leaders. Keeping our community strong and sustainable is what drives her to give back through public service. A graduate of Boise State University, she served as a state representative for District 19 in Idaho's 72nd legislature. She has also volunteered for many local organizations, including Boise State Venture College, New Leadership Idaho, and the 2012 Yes for Boise Schools campaign. Holly's other community service includes serving as a board chair for the Girl Scouts Silver Sage, a board member of the Boise State Foundation, and on the board of advisors for Idaho Women in Leadership. I am pleased to introduce Boise Council member Holly Woodings.
Thank you. I'm going to stick this in here. I actually prepared comments because I don't have a very long time, and so I tend to get verbose if I don't know exactly what I'm going to say. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. This is a really important issue, and education is always kind of the first step in understanding what we need to do. And it's a hugely impactful issue for our students today. And I'm here to say I'm not the most expert person that you're going to hear from tonight. I'm probably the least expert person, but I have kids, so I know it always doesn't seem like we're being listened to. But I'll tell you that we still have a huge influence in their lives. And the example that we set is probably one of the most important ways that we have that influence. By leading healthy lives and talking with our kids about what vaping actually is and how it impacts our bodies, we give them the information that they need to make informed decisions. But we as a community also need to lead by example. If we say it's okay to vape and not okay to smoke, that's setting the tone that vaping is safe, which health experts, who are just sitting right here, have demonstrated to us that it's just not true. Currently, the city of Boise is in the process of updating our smoke-free air ordinance to prohibit vaping and the use of e-cigarettes in public places, such as city parks, on the Greenbelt, within 20 feet of public entrances, and other places where smoking is already prohibited. When the smoke-free air ordinance was passed in 2011, which was before my time on council, the opposition to the ordinance was deafening. Boise businesses said that they would have to close their doors if they couldn't allow smoking. Businesses in neighboring cities rejoiced that they may see a windfall of new customers from displaced smokers. People protested losing the freedom to smoke where they pleased. In the end, the city council did the right thing to protect the air we breathe in public places, but they specifically exempted vaping since it was a new technology at the time. Fast forward 8 years to just last week when City Council voted to add vaping to the ordinance. All those who came in front of City Council were in support of the change, citing that we know more now about the health concerns of vaping and the secondhand vapors, talking about its impact on clean air, talking about the lack of differentiation between smoking and vaping, talking about how it can be a gateway for young people to move on to cigarettes. It's clear that people understand clean air and the impacts of vaping. And to go back to that 2011 testimony, none of those scenarios played out. In fact, smoking in public places is now prohibited in more cities than ever. Many of them are neighbors. Most businesses have also been disallowing vaping alongside smoking as a business choice, and now they'll have a city ordinance to back it up. Adding vaping to the ordinance wasn't actually my idea. I was only the messenger. Several months back, I was contacted by a Greenbelt patrol volunteer who had an issue. Smokers who use the Greenbelt were upset because they had to endure people's vapor plumes, but smoking still wasn't allowed. Those users saw smoking and vaping as two delivery systems for the same result and called out the unfairness of the ordinance. The Greenbelt volunteers didn't like the plumes any more than anyone else, and so one of them reached out to me for a possible resolution. I also heard from the Cancer Action Network, who was interested in providing more context around vaping and support of the change. After talking in a public meeting with the Parks and Recreation Commission, since one of the ordinances relates specifically to our parks and receiving an enthusiastic recommendation to change the ordinance. I was contacted by health professionals, citizens, park users, senior organizations, and many others who also support the change. They recognize the positive impact of clean air for all, and many showed up in front of City Council and the mayor to voice that support. Our final reading of the ordinance to prohibit vaping and the use of e-cigarettes will be May 7th. And then Boiseans can enjoy air free from vapor just as we've enjoyed smoke-free air for the past years while enjoying our public spaces in Boise. My family and I are all looking forward to having a smoke and vape-free beach to enjoy at Esther Simplot Park this summer. And if you need to find us on a weekend, it's most likely that we'll be there. Thank you so much for caring enough to be here tonight. Thanks to all the folks who are providing much needed information and all the SROs, teachers, administrators, health professionals, and others who are on the front lines of enforcement. Together, we can send the message that vaping is not safe, does not belong in the hands of our kids, and doesn't belong in our shared air. Thank you very much.
So this includes kind of the round one. Again, we'll be doing a repeat presentation of the principal panel as well as the medical panel. But why I do have your attention, I do want to give a shout out to Amanda Kuznia. She's over here, and she has put this on, and we are so grateful for her leadership. She has spent countless hours organizing everything, and so I doffed my cap to you. Thank you so much. All right, we'll start the principal panel in just a few minutes. Thank you very much. So we have with us Trevor McKenna. He's the vice principal at Boise High, and Janet Cherry. She is the principal of West Junior High. So the first question for our panel is, what are the consequences if my child is caught vaping at school?
Hi, thanks for coming out tonight. The consequences when students are caught at vaping at school are really twofold. We really encourage the education piece, which is a tobacco cessation course in the event that they're vaping. And when students and parents enroll in the tobacco cessation course, the amount of time that the students are suspended out of school is reduced. So if a parent and student enroll in the tobacco cessation course, which is 6 weeks, 2 hours once weekly for that time period, students are given in-house suspension for 2 days, and they're suspended out of school for 1 day. And in addition to that, we will also get our school resource officer involved, and the students will get a tobacco citation as well.
And just kind of to add to that, it's always our goal, obviously, as educators to make sure we're educating students about the dangers of tobacco, drugs, alcohol, and also parents. And I think that's one of the biggest things, the way our policy is written, is to highly encourage that. We don't want students out of school ever. Sometimes there's a reason for it. We need that, but our goal is always to try and reduce that suspension and obviously educate students and parents. So that's the way our policy is set up, I think works very well. And giving students and parents the opportunity to learn about, for this case, the examples of vaping is super important because of a lot of the misconceptions out there. They were discussed earlier about vaping isn't as dangerous as smoking, and letting students understand and parents know that is just not true. And so those classes really do a good job of educating our parents and our students. So I think I'm glad that we can provide that rather than just say, here's a consequence, but here's also some classes you can take and some resources to help you not make that poor decision again.
Okay, so this next question was kind of written this way. It's how big of a problem, but I'd like to reframe it. And can you just kind of describe the problems that vaping presents at the school? So what is the problem? Give us some kind of the ins and outs of that.
Well, I think one of the major problems that I see at Boise High that vaping presents is that a lot of times it's keeping kids from being in class. So I think with the levels of nicotine that some of the medical professionals described earlier, we're seeing students with addiction issues, particularly addiction to nicotine. So it's impacting them in the classroom. It's taking them out of the classroom so they can access that nicotine. So I think that that's the biggest impact that I see, is the impact that it's having on students and their learning. And then obviously the health effects as well.
And I echo all of that. And I think also, I think this was mentioned earlier too, the impact on the students who aren't vaping. I always look at that. They should be able to go into a restroom and not see another student vaping, or be in a classroom and not look over and see their classmate vaping. It really, I think, puts those students in a tough situation too. I know we talked to teachers too about vaping, and I've had teachers a year or two ago that said, oh, no student would ever vape in my class. I would know if they were vaping. Unfortunately, kids are vaping in class without the students or without the teacher knowing, because like the panel talked about earlier, they're small, they're disguised in, I don't know, what 7,000 different ways, or what was that number? And so, and because of how they're used, it can happen right in a classroom. And I think that's, it's also an epidemic not only for the students vaping, but for the whole classroom atmosphere. We want our teachers being able to focus on the education of students, and they also have to look out for students vaping on their cell phones. So there's a big task for our teachers as well.
Thank you. Next, if you could describe, what are the schools doing to educate children about vaping? So maybe you could talk about certain classes, or where it's in the curriculum, whether it's just kind of anecdotally through student council meetings. Just tell us how that's being addressed in education about vaping.
I can address one component, and then I can pass it on to Ms. Cherry to expand on that. But at the high school level, all the students are required to take health as part of a graduation requirement, and there is a built-in unit on vaping that the students go through. And this year we had students that were actually producing anti-vaping videos as part of the education. And we have a summit at Boise High School every year that's a student-led summit where the students are picking topics of interest based around a central theme, and then other students and teachers attend those presentations. And we had a student group that put on a presentation about vaping and the dangers of vaping and the problems that vaping is causing. And it was actually one of our highly attended presentations for the day. So that is one component.
And at the junior high level, students will have to take health in 8th grade, and it's also a component of that curriculum. And it's also talked about in the PE classes, just talking about healthy lifestyles. And so we try and get it in a bunch of different ways. I think the area that we struggle in is, I'd say the social media piece, because kids are getting all kinds of mixed messages that way, or just wrong messages, not even mixed, about vaping is the thing to do. And I think we're always looking for new ways to connect with students and to get that message across in a way that they'll understand. And so that's what we're looking at, is trying to we understand students don't always listen to adults because they know everything, and we don't. So we're trying to figure out a way to educate students about it in a way that they'll actually listen to. And that social media seems to be the piece that we're trying to go at West. And I think with the other junior high principals, we've gotten together trying to talk about that as well, of what kind of media we can use that's going to connect with students.
Yeah, and I would also just add to that we're not looking at just a school problem, and we're not just looking at a problem that's occurring at the home. It's really a community problem that needs to be addressed as a community. And I think if we're waiting to educate our students in junior high or high school on the dangers of vaping, I think we've waited too long and missed the boat. So I think another key component is early intervention and early education, starting at the elementary schools.
And I can verify that it's taking place. In fact, one of our panel members talked about that, and I think Nurse Polson will be directing it again, how it's taught in the elementary grades. So the next is kind of twofold, or they're maybe one and the same. Is one, how are kids getting vapes? And then what should a parent be looking for? Like, how can I tell if my kid is vaping?
Well, I'll address the first question of how students are getting vapes, and I think there are countless number of ways that students are getting vapes. They will buy them from people on the street. They will go into stores and buy them illegally. For whatever reason, they're able to do that. And I've heard a growing number of students that we've been talking to as, we've been catching them, because that's an interesting question to me. And there's an increasing number of students that I've been having telling me that they're actually just buying them online. And the medical professionals that were up here earlier mentioned that too. It's not that they're providing some sort of identification and verification how old they are. It's, you click in the drop-down box and you say that you're of age, and they're able to access that that way as well.
Yeah, I think they're getting them all different ways. We have, they take their parents' vapes, bring them to school. Older brothers and sisters, they get them that way. And I think getting them from each other. I think that the one way now that we've seen more and more of in talking with kids, and I think that's one thing we're all trying to do now, is to understand how we can help students. We also have to figure out what is their motivation behind it. And so I know we all try and ask some of those questions, like, where'd you get it? And not just to be curious, so we can also kind of head that off. And online seems to be one of the growing ways students are getting vapes now.
And as far as how you can tell if your student is vaping or not, I think that's a real difficult thing to tell, just by virtue of the fact that they're largely odorless and they're so small. But I would say, as a parent, you have a right to know what's going on with your kiddos, and you have a right to know what's in their backpacks and in their drawers at home. And so I think, just knowing what your kiddos are up to and paying really, really close attention is one way.
So one of the things, if you could address, so what happens, so a lot of times school grounds becomes tricky. Like they're at a track meet across town, or maybe they're at a school dance that doesn't even take place on the school grounds themselves. It's down at the Owyhee Plaza or something. Can you talk about kids and the consequences for vaping if they're not at school? Is it still something they're in trouble for?
The consequences are still the same, because any school-sponsored activity, whether it's on campus or not, is treated the same way. Like I said, that goes for a football game, it goes for a choir concert, it goes for the school bus stop. That's also a big one, is kids think, well, I'm not at school, and they're standing out for the bus. And we'll get calls, kids are out vaping, waiting for their bus. It was a little tricky when it was cold out, because we would get lots of calls, and we found out that it was just that it was really cold. So that was kind of threw us for a loop for a while. But I think those are areas too. Kids think, well, I'm not at school yet. But those are areas that are kind of where kids, they congregate and they do that stuff. We found that kids were hiding their vapes at their bus stop, so they weren't bringing them to school. But they would get to the bus stop early, and then they would vape, hide their vape, and then get on the school bus.
Okay, and then the last question for the evening before we transition to our other panel is, and it came up last time, but what can parents do? Let's say that even their child has not been caught vaping, but they would like them to be involved in a cessation class. Is that something they can access, and if so, how can they do that?
Yeah, I think, obviously as schools, we're a central part of the community, and, our number one priority is to, help students be successful and provide resources to families. So it's not uncommon whatsoever to have parents call and express concern over their child and the potential of them vaping. And so, yeah, we absolutely make those tobacco cessation courses or the survival courses that are more geared towards drug and alcohol abuse available to parents and students, and we'll sign them up free of charge whenever requested, and provided space in the class.
Well, I believe this year we had to add several more classes for the tobacco cessation. I don't know the exact number, but it seemed like every time we would call to set up get a student in there, it's, well, that class is full. And so I think that's why we see it as an epidemic. It is happening, and it is something that we want to make sure and provide those resources for our students. And so having those additional classes has been really helpful because they are happening almost immediately then. And the students are getting those, and the students and parents are getting that information they need.
Okay, Vice Principal McKenna and Principal Cherry, just with your last few seconds or so, what is it that you really would like parents to know? So maybe just kind of your parting words of wisdom to us.
Well, it's a major problem, and we need to work together as a school and as a community to help intervene and educate our students and prevent this from coming in our school buildings. School buildings should be a safe place for students to come and access their education and not be exposed to these types of things. And so I think it's really important that we open up the dialogue like we're doing tonight, and we work together to make a difference with our kids.
And I agree wholeheartedly. And I think the other thing we need to do is make sure we're talking to our kids and having that open, honest conversation. I think some of the panelists mentioned earlier, asking your child, have you vaped, or have you seen kids at school vape? Are your friends vaping? Are you vaping? And to have that open dialogue with them. And then also, like I said, trying to stay on top of all of the trends between social media, vaping, different devices and everything. It's daunting and it can be overwhelming. And I know there are days when we find a vape that I haven't seen before. I think, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to keep on this? But we have to. We just can't say, oh, I can't keep up. We have to just keep going, and we have to work together. And I think combine our resources and make sure we're available and communicating with each other so that we have as much information as we can. And like I said, it's a partnership, and then we all need to be involved in.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate you being our panel principals. Thank you very much. So we're going to start the last portion, and this panel presented before and was very, very informative. So our first guest is Dr. Jennifer Schals. Did I say that right? Schals. Schals. So I did not say that right. Schals. And she is I'm going to let her introduce herself because I think we had some inaccurate information. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. So I'm an internal medicine doctor, and I'm the medical director, system medical director for lifestyle medicine at St. Luke's, but I specifically have been asked to speak here because I'm the medical director of the nicotine dependence treatment program.
Sure. I'm Margie Sony. I'm a nurse practitioner. I am a nurse practitioner at St. Luke's, Idaho Pulmonary Associates, so I deal with all sorts of lung diseases, and I'm the associate medical director with Dr. Schals at the St. Luke's Nicotine Dependence Treatment Program.
Hi, I'm Kim Polson. I am a school nurse at Roosevelt in Washington, and I've worked in emergency room settings in the past.
So the first question we have tonight is, so kind of what's the big deal? Vaping is just kind of taking in water vapor. It's way safer than smoking. Why is there such an outcry?
There's an outcry for a number of different reasons. Vaping is not water vapor. It's called that, actually. The industry loves to call it vaping because they give that impression that it's just harmless water vapor. In fact, medical professionals like to call it what it is, which is an electronic cigarette. So it's using it's a battery to heat up a liquid that contains all kinds of substances that are toxic to the human body. One of the number one things that's in e-cigarettes is nicotine. And nicotine is one of the most addictive substances on earth. And most of these e-cigarettes contain nicotine. And we'll talk about that and its negative effects in a minute. But the other stuff that's in the liquids that people are inhaling, again, not water vapor, are particulate matter that contains formaldehyde, which is cancer-causing, acrolein, which is cancer-causing, heavy metals like nickel and tin, etc., There are flavorings. These are flavorings that are FDA approved for eating, but these are flavorings that people are now putting into their lungs directly, into their very fragile lung tissue, these little particles. And so this is not just water vapor. This is particulate matter that is going into the lung tissue.
And I think there's two other pieces to that. One, as I tell my patients in the lung clinic, there's nothing that's okay to inhale into your lungs. Your lungs are incredibly fragile. If you've ever seen an actual lung before, I don't know why you would have, but they're incredibly fragile and easy to tear and easy to break down. And anything you heat, it can be a smoke from a campfire, smoke from a burning house, smoke from anything, any inhaled heat is very damaging to the architecture, the structure of your lungs. The second piece is, in prep for this, I went online and started Googling what's in vape liquid. No one actually knows. So we know some of these things. They're breaking down the products in some of the testing labs, and we know some of these things that Dr. Schall's just mentioned. But in so many of the products, we have no idea, which is frighteningly similar to when cigarettes first came on the market. They were not required to tell us, and it's unclear what's actually in them. And I'm sure you all know this, but the major vape products are owned by Big Tobacco.
And also, if you consider e-cigarettes came on the market in 2005. We're now in 2018, and the Surgeon General's reports in 2011, 1% of girls the ages 12 to 24 reported trying vaping, 2% in boys. Now in 2018, we see an increase of 19% of girls and 23% of boys. So since 2005 to 2019, we're seeing a dramatic jump in our students and our children starting earlier and also being exposed to these harmful chemicals.
So again, Nurse Paulson, every time you say something, you kind of like tee it up for me. It's awesome. And we haven't even met before outside of this stage presentation here. So could you kind of address, so we hear the word vaping and we hear the word juuling and we hear the word e-cigarettes. Are they the same? Are they different? I know that came up last time and it was you guys responded to that really well. If you could just address that.
Okay, so I would encourage anyone, I don't know if anyone from here has already gone into the gym, but I think you'll be shocked if you go in the gym, especially the St. Luke's, one of our respiratory therapists is over there, and she has all kinds of products. They're all the same. They're all e-cigarettes. So Juul is a company, and people call it a Juul, and here it is. You can see it looks like a flash drive or USB flash drive, and there's a aerosol that looks like a inhaler, like an albuterol inhaler. $98. You can get it online. It's an actual e-cigarette. There are pens that you can get that look like real fountain pens. Those are e-cigarettes. And I know Margie's going to talk about another one that some of the rock stars are promoting. There is our respiratory therapist over there, Gabby, is wearing a sweatshirt that has the strings that come out from the hoodie. You can actually vape. You could put vape materials or liquid into the hoodie and vape with your sweatshirt from those little ties. They're all the same. They're all dangerous. Do you want to talk about the rock stars?
Yes, but also there's things, hookahs, vapes, e-cigarettes. There's a zillion different kinds on the market, and the kids call them all different things. Pods, ends, whatever. So what? Sorens, yeah. I was doing prep for this, and there's a bunch of different websites where you can get on and look at the social media for these products. One of them is called a candy pen, candy with a K because that's cute, and Dr. Dre, DJ Khaled, ASAP, all the cool hip rock artists or hip-hop artists, rappers out there are using vapes, are paid to use vapes in their videos so that the kids think it's cool. So I was shocked. I kind of like DJ Khaled, but not anymore.
And also in 2015, when Juuls came on the market, they revolutionized what vaping was. Prior, it used to be a big, I think you have a picture, Margie, don't you? Of a big cumbersome box that had a large cartridge that carried the vaping liquid, and it had a lot of smoke. So it was not easy to hide. When Juuls came on the market, they created a design that's easy to hide, it's odorless, so kids can actually vape just as if they're coughing into their sweater and pass it amongst people. Because what they did is they've increased the amount of nicotine that they have in their pods, in their vape juice, and they also used a nic salt in order to soothe the throat. So a lot of times if you have a higher amount of nicotine, your throat tends to burn. But with nic salts, when you inhale that percentage of nicotine, it's a smoother vape, and therefore it's not as painful. So Juul's kind of revolutionized. And they're one of the top companies on Forbes right now.
I guess we should mention that 70% of the people, Juul owns 70% of the market for e-cigarettes. 70%. That's how popular they are. They have very high concentrations of nicotine. One Juul pod has as much nicotine as a pack of cigarettes. But with this change in salts, where it makes it smoother, you can actually get a quicker, bigger hit of nicotine using a Juul than maybe even a cigarette. So they're really promoting mass addiction.
So with that was a great segue. Would you just spell, like, what are the dangers in nicotine, particularly in adolescent teenagers?
So nicotine, as I mentioned, is one of the most addictive substances on Earth. But nicotine, teenage brains don't, human brains are not fully mature until 25. And it's in that adolescent time that brains are most susceptible to the effects of addiction. You're more sensitive to it, and it will promote addiction later on in life to other substances, not just nicotine. But in addition, it can interrupt concentration and focus and learning, and is associated with causing ADHD and other mental health issues down the road. So I know that each one of these guys has some additional comments on that.
So you can see me leafing through here a whole huge study on the short and long-term consequences of nicotine exposure during adolescence. They go into a lot of really long words, but the short version, as Dr. Schall's alluded to, the prefrontal cortex up until you're 25 is not fully developed, but the reward center is. So the reward center gets hit by the nicotine, the dopamine release in the brain, and it overwhelms the impulse control, right? That's why kids are experimenting and doing things like trying things, right? That's the whole point, is that it stimulates that reward center in the not fully formulated prefrontal cortex. Nothing personal, kids. It's on everybody until you're 25, right? So the effects of nicotine on that adolescent brain stimulate, so two things. One, it's a super quick addiction process in the not fully formed brain. So one study showed that kids can get addicted to nicotine, be unable to quit before they're up to a two cigarette a day, not 2-pack, 2 cigarette a day. That's 20 puffs on a Juul. If they're doing that most days out of a week, they're addicted already, and they're going to have trouble quitting. Not even it's a small portion of a cartridge. 10% of the cartridge. Of a single cartridge, right? And then the second part of that is these kids go on to develop. So kids who are early on addicted to nicotine, actually marijuana and alcohol, or using nicotine, marijuana, and alcohol, not even addicted, go on to develop many, many mental health disorders. Bipolar disorder, depression, ADHD. There's some thought that there's an increased risk of other schizophrenia, those kinds of other very serious mental health disorders that are linked to any kind of substance abuse in the teenage brain.
I think also I reached out to my colleagues, the secondary school nurses at Boise Unified School District and Nampa District, what they're seeing is kids are using vaping. Initially, prior to tests, there's some anxiety generally, and they want to seek vaping prior to their tests for that sense of calm and euphoria that was associated with what Margie said. So they'll vape prior to a test, but then when it gets closer and the effects of the nicotine are wearing off or increasing, they are coming in with rapid heartbeat. They're coming in with difficulty breathing and an increased sense of anxiousness. So their anxiety in turn actually develops and triples.
Sorry, I forgot about this other study that linked nicotine, alcohol, and marijuana use in adolescent brains to an early reduction in gray matter in your brain. It literally shrinks your brain.
So the research on combustible secondhand smoke is clear. We've known that for a long time. What do we know about secondhand smoke for vaping?
So we know that it also is dangerous. So the secondhand smoke or secondhand aerosol, I guess, contains all of the things that the person themselves is inhaling. So it contains nicotine, it contains these cancer-causing agents that we talked about, it contains these flavorings that shouldn't be inhaled into the lungs. And so people being exposed secondhand, and by the way, there was a research that just came out in the last couple of weeks, said that about 50 to 55% of middle schoolers and high schoolers have been exposed both inside and outside to secondhand smoke, whether it's from vaping or tobacco products. So a huge percentage of our kids are being exposed, and we think of that secondhand smoke from vape or e-cigarettes as as harmful, just like the vape itself is harmful to the person using it.
So what I'd like to do for the last portion is just give each one of you are experts in this area, and clearly you're passionate about it. You're taking of your own time, of your eating to do this, and we thank you so much for that. What is it kind of also we did with the principal panel? What are your words of wisdom or kind of parting thoughts for us?
I would say that there is mass addiction going on. Everyone needs to know that. It's being promoted by the tobacco companies, and that vaping, e-cigarettes, we're going to find out that it's going to cause a lot of chronic disease. It's making asthma worse in kids, respiratory conditions worse. It's changing their brains, and we're creating, like I said, an entire generation that will be developing chronic disease because of this mass addiction, and how are we going to pay for it?
So one statistic that stands out to me is 70% of kids, 67% of kids that they polled did not know or said they didn't think there was nicotine in Juuls, and every single Juul has nicotine in it. So talk to your kids, start the conversation. Kids, start the conversation. Talk to your friends. What I wish I had known when I was younger is that don't fool yourselves. This is the smoking that we dealt with when we were growing up. Don't fool yourselves. I hear a lot of kids saying, that's okay, it's not smoking. We know not to smoke cigarettes. That's disgusting. Vaping will also harm you. You will become addicted to nicotine very quickly, and you're 4 times more likely to start smoking cigarettes if you vape as a kid. So talk to your friends. What I wish I had known is I wish I had the ability to go back and talk to my patients now who are dying of lungs-related problems, COPD, severe asthma, ILD, interstitial lung disease, other lung diseases caused by inhaling hot stuff, so vaping. I wish I'd been able to, all of them started at 14 or 15. I don't have very few patients who've started after the age of 25. That's going to be the case with you guys. Every single one of my patients says, I wish I'd never started. I wish somebody had told me. I wish somebody had come down hard on me. But it's too late. They're dying.
No, thanks, Margie. I think that's really important. I think it's important to recognize that this industry, as my colleagues have mentioned, is targeting our children. They are specifically designing this product to serve them. And even me in elementary, we do not see vaping. We don't have that exposure, but we do have kids talking about vaping. They have seen it from either siblings, older siblings, or parents. Therefore, we need to have this education with kids openly, as my colleagues had said, and don't think just because they're young, they're not exposed to it. It's hitting them from all aspects of their life. And there is stuff that we can do. We, as parents, as community leaders, as directors, we can advocate. Let's increase the legal age of how old you can be to buy vape. Let's ensure that you ask for identification when you go in to purchase. Let's try to put regulations on when they're trying to buy online vaping products to ensure that our children are safe. Because in the end, everyone wants to ensure that we have a better life.
So that concludes the evening. Thank you so much, panel. If we could give a round of applause for them. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. There is, if you wanted to, in case you just have not been to the cafeteria or the gym, I think most of you have. If you wanted to stop by there, you're welcome to do so. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for coming tonight on this very important topic.